My name's Sarah O'Leary. I work at myosh. I help produce the HSEQ news, and obviously I arrange webinars quite frequently now. From here, I think we'll introduce David. We really appreciate his time today. He is the Managing Director of ForgeWorks Safety Consultancy and a part-time research fellow at Griffith University. He has a 20-year career as a safety executive across the rail, construction and oil and gas industries. His academic research interests include the operationalizational of safety 2 and resilience engineering, and what it means for the current and future role of safety professionals within organisations. David is the co-host of the Safety of Work podcast with Dr. Drew Ray, which discovers safety science, research findings in a practical way so that organisations can move further towards evidence-based safety practice. And without further ado, David, thank you very much and welcome today.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks to the team at myosh for inviting me along, and thanks to everyone who's joined into the webinar and maybe who's going to listen to it down the track. So I've got quite a bit of content to cover, and hopefully I can live up to the expectations that you had when you decided to listen in. Right off the bat, I just want to say that I'm not really going to get into a debate about Safety 1 and Safety 2, but I'm going to clarify my position on it. Safety 2 is a necessary extension of Safety 1. It's a new set of practices and ideas that we can use to build on the foundations that we've made in safety over the last, well, since the Industrial Revolution, really. Traditional safety, and to some extent current safety that we use to describe Safety 1, it does have flaws and it does have limitations. And if we don't expand our practices and our approaches, then we'll never get to the goals that we want to achieve in safety. So that's my position. Safety 2 is an extension of Safety 1, and it's a necessary extension. The webinar that I'm going to talk through is based on a research paper that was a collaboration between myself and Sydney Decker and Drew Ray at Griffith with Professor David Woods at Ohio State University. He was one of the founders of the resilience engineering discipline 30 years ago. So this paper's been published in Reliability Engineering and System Safety. It's open access. You're free to download and share that paper, and we might put that in the link after this webinar. So this paper was also the final chapter of my PhD thesis, which was titled "What is the Role of a Safety Professional?", where I looked at the current practice and the future of the profession. So I make kind of no apologies that some of what I will talk about today will seem hard and complex, and it is. Safety management is hard and complex. I say that, in my opinion, the safety management role or the safety professional role in organizations is the hardest role in the company. It's a role that has a stake in how every single task is performed every single day by every single person. It needs to know what's happening in the boardroom as much as it needs to know what's happening on the front line. It needs to know what's happening in the HR department, the procurement department, the finance department, the legal department, and every other department you might have. So it is hard, it is complex. There's no simple accidents, and we really need to move away from simple safety models, simple safety explanations, and simple safety solutions. So this webinar, the format that I'm going to use to talk through this is I'm going to talk about our current practice in organizations, and this is sort of heavily informed from a literature review that I did in 2017, which looked at the last 30 years of research into the safety profession. And then I'm going to talk through the paper that I just mentioned about what the future might look like, which was done by doing a literature review of the Safety 2, Safety Differently, and resilience engineering literature through the lens of what it might mean for the profession. So let's get started. Okay. So what's the purpose of our role in organizations? And this is a purpose that I came up with when I looked at what current practice looks like. To support line management, to implement safety processes and practices that meet organizational safety objectives. Now, you might sit there and go, yep, that seems okay. And, you know, for much of my career, I would have gone, yeah, well, that's my job. I'm an advisor to line management, and I'm a supporting role for them. My job is to implement safety processes and practices. In the goal of meeting organizational safety objectives. I think this purpose has a whole lot of flaws, and I'll talk through that in the next couple of slides. But we need to think about who is our customer. Is our customer line management, or is our customer the people who are exposed to risk? We need to think about, is our role only in the implementation of safety processes and practices, or is our role more broad than those things that are titled safety in the organisation? And then we need to think about, is our role only about meeting organisational safety objectives, and have we even articulated the right organisational safety objectives? So you start to see that what looks on the surface to be quite a simple and quite a clear and quite a useful purpose creates a whole lot of barriers for how we might address safety in our organisation. So what are we trying to achieve when we think about traditional safety management in organisations? And what I came up with from the literature and in looking at the research is kind of like there's 5 capacities that organisations are trying to manage and maintain in their organisation. There's a capacity to analyse hazards, and you'll see there's a capacity to implement controls to mitigate those hazards, both physical and behavioural controls. There's a need to monitor conformance. So are those controls working? Is the organisation working as I expect it to? We do that proactively and we do that reactively. There's a delegation of authority and responsibility and accountability throughout the organisation. What do management have to do? What do safety professionals have to do? And what do workers have to do? And then there's this promotion of safety as a priority of the organisation, and this promotion of a standardised and active or proactive safety culture and commitment in the organisation. So hopefully many of you who are listening in go, yep, I recognise that. Yep, that's what we do. Yep, that's how we manage safety. And it is. And to a large degree, some of these foundational capacities will continue to be necessary capacities for organisations well into the future. So in the pursuit of these capacities, what is the role of the safety profession then? So I list 8 tasks here. And when I talk through these tasks about what the safety professional does, I want to touch on a couple of things. One is that there was a study done in early 2000s by Andrew Hale and David Boris that surveyed nearly 9,000 safety professionals in more than a dozen countries and asked, what do you spend your time on? And there was a surprising consistency throughout the world. This is 15 odd years ago, about what safety professionals and practitioners were spending their time on. And it came down to developing safety policies and procedures, performing safety training, doing risk assessments, and investigating incidents and doing audits and those types of things, which we have been the core part of our professional role for the last 20 or 30 years. And something like 60 or 70% of respondents across all countries basically listed those things as covering about 80% of their time in organisations. Now, we haven't got current data that says whether that's still the case or not, but at least in my experience and in some parts of my PhD research, it still feels fairly consistent with the way the profession practices today. What I want to do is go through these activities, and I want to talk a little bit about if these activities are only our focus, and if we focus on these really, really hard, then what are the implications for the organisation, and what are potentially the negative implications for organisations? So let's go through. So safety professionals need to support the task-based identification of hazards, and we've got lots of these in our organisations. You will have pre-start risk assessments and take fives and JSAs and work method statements and a whole heap of stuff to identify hazards associated with tasks. The problem here is when we push this too hard and when we mandate it for every activity, and when people are doing it 10 times a day, it makes compliance and tick and flick the objective of the exercise rather than the identification of the hazards. These processes, significantly impact on the time and the resources that are available for doing work. So they introduce additional goal conflict into tasks and activities. And they can also create a fixed model of risk for a task. If you go through this big exercise at the start of the task and you believe it's safe, then we know from psychology that as new information emerges during the task, it will make it harder for you to reframe your model of risk and adjust your task along the way based on the situation that you face. We also have a role in identifying the system level hazards, and we do this. We have business risk registers, we do HAZOPs and a whole raft of risk analysis into system safety and process safety and technical safety in our organisations. These things have similar sort of negative impacts in terms of creating a fixed model of risk. But what also happens is these things are often used to prove to other people that our systems are safe. So they go into regulatory documents and they go into other communication that we give outside our organization as to why things are safe. So it can actually create a false sense of safety within the organization, and a lack of knowledge of the actual real level of risk within the organization. And you start to see the way I'm talking about this. I'm not saying we don't do these things. I'm saying if we rely on them and we hold them up as being the pillar of safety in our organization, then it can have some potential negative consequences to safety climate and safety risk management. So number three, we develop controls for tasks. So we're working at heights and contractor management, all these safety processes we've got and safety procedures we've got. What we end up doing though is we go task control, risk and then control, risk and then control, and we continually keep adding and adding and adding to our system. We never kind of look at the way that the whole system functions and how it integrates, and how it actually works and what's actually necessary to put in place, and what we actually don't need to do. In terms of monitoring controls proactively, a lot of this is inspections and audits. You know, we try to find the problems before they become the accident, and then after the accident, we investigate. These types of processes, they create adversarial relationships in organizations. There's a lot of emotion and challenge organizationally around these types of activities. No one wants to be the one who's done the wrong thing, either before an accident or after an accident. So it's very hard as a safety professional to one day go and be an auditor or an investigator, and the next day try to saddle up to someone in your organization and say, come on, tell me how things really happen. Wearing those different hats is next to impossible within an organization. So there are some places here where organizations have to make choices. And for example, in one of my roles, I refused to do safety audits because I didn't want an auditee relationship between any safety person in the organization and any operational part of the organization. So these are things. So there are some choices in safety 1 and safety 2. That's not everything is a nice, easy extension of what we've been doing in the past. We provide a lot of incident and compliance reporting to line management and regulators. We won't get into a whole discussion about metrics and measures and reporting and the negative implications of that. I'll assume that everyone's well versed in what can happen when we provide safety incident and compliance reporting within our organisation. But it tends to pull resources and attention away from risk, to the things that have happened, the minor incidents, the minor issues, or administrative compliance, as opposed to a goal-directed focus on major risk reduction in our businesses. Supporting line management decision-making. Generally, line management decision-making is always going to be black and white. It makes safety professional decision-making generally always black and white. It's very hard for the safety professional to be a partner of the line and then challenge the line and side with the workforce. This relationship between the safety profession and line management and the workforce is one that I think has become quite corrupted within organisations. I think we're passive servants of line managers and power and authority within the organisation, and I think we need to be, actively independent facilitators of safety within our organisation. So the last couple here, we promote an authority to stop work for safety across the frontline workforce. So we do that. We need to let people know that they can stop work if it's not safe, and we promote safety culture improvement programs. We do a lot of work to make sure that safety is seen to be the most important thing in our organisation. So if you want to read further in the paper, there's a whole lot of detail underneath this, but hopefully you're sitting back there going, yep, okay, we do that. Yep, I'm involved in that. I do that. And some of you might think that's a pretty complete list. That takes up all of my week and all my time. And if we get those 8 things right, then we will go a very long way towards getting safety right in our organisation. And that may well be true. I still think there's more that needs to be done than what's on this list, and that's what I'm going to talk about now. But there's also a hell of a lot of work that we can do just to make these existing practices in our organisation work in a constructive way. But what happens to work if this is not done in a constructive way? So wrote this kind of model to say is when organisations focus on their plan for work, and we could think about this as work as imagined, or what's written in the procedures and the systems that we're trying to understand the organisation's conformance to. When we focus our effort on work as imagined or how we think the world should work, we tend to discount what's actually happening. we actually push so hard on what we want our workers to do that we create double binds for them. We create all these goal conflicts and trade-offs and double binds. That means they've got to actually get the job done. And fluency describes the way that actually work is performed. But they've also got to meet all these organizational expectations. And if those expectations are so rigid, you end up in a situation where workers have no choice but to create covert work systems. So simulated compliance, which is, I don't have time to do a 10-minute take 5, 10 times a day. Every time I start a new task off, I'll tick 10 off in the morning. I'll hand them in at the end of the day and I'll satisfy my compliance requirement. I'll still be able to get the job done and the organization won't know. So these covert work systems, so the organization doesn't actually know how work happens. And on the surface, it looks like the plan is working. But people tend to also retreat into their own roles. So they don't dare step outside of their box, because if they show initiative and they step outside of their box and they adjust their work to meet the situation they face, then they're likely to get, their head chopped off or get brought into line. So it's kind of like the lemmings kind of like following each other off a cliff rather than stepping out of line. So this is what happens. And ironically, the more that in our organizations we push harder on safety, the more we push down this path, the worse that we actually make this adaptation in our organization. And I say that to some companies now, you're actually not doing the right thing by throwing more and more resources at these existing measures if they're destructive in your organization, because you're creating this destructive adaptation cycle within your business. And businesses will probably rarely know that until it's too late. So what it kind of means is at worst, it means that the safety professional role becomes what I labeled as fragmented, defensive, and reactive. So it's fragmented in a sense that safety only plays with things that are titled safety. We play with safety policies, safety procedures, safety training, safety risk assessment, safety audit, safety inspections, safety incident investigations, and dare not the safety department step outside of anything to do with safety, because it's easier for organizations to functionalize and compartmentalize their different organizations into particular boxes. But as I said at the very start, safety doesn't play within a specific safety box. Safety is an emergent property of the interactions across your whole organization. So that fragmentation is a real compromise to effectively managing safety in your business. And those other two things about being reactive and defensive, it's kind of like safety as a detect and repair mechanism for the organization. So, be reactive. So if there's a non-compliance or if there's an incident or if there's a problem, detect the problem, react to it, and then repair it. Open safety issues are a threat to individuals and organizations. An organization can't have a major incident and turn around and say, we don't think we really understand it. We're going to take 6 months or 9 months or 12 months to really turn ourselves inside out and make sure that we understand what we need to do. Even though that might be necessary, organizations need to have answers. Organizations don't like uncertainty when it comes to safety. So it's a bit ironic, this cycle, that the more safety things that get detected, the more necessity there is for safety people to repair what they found. So it's like the never-ending action list of safety that you've probably got in your organization, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of observations and incidents and audit findings and inspection records and that cycle of detect and repair. And you never actually stop and look at the way that your organization's functioning and, the things that you really should be doing proactively to manage safety into the future within your company. So what do we do? So we wrote a new purpose for the practitioner, which was to create foresight about the changing shape of risk and facilitate action before people are harmed. So a few things in here. Rather than supporting line management, the task is to create foresight. So understanding how your organization is currently functioning and how it might and what that might mean for the future of safety risk within your organization. So you're trying to understand that changing shape of risk. What trajectory is our organization on? And then importantly, facilitating action before people are harmed. So how do you get that foresight that you've created about risk in your business, and how do you translate that into tangible organizational action proactively? If we if we're responding to incidents and reporting incidents, we've kind of already failed in our objective. If we get to count the number of things that have gone wrong, then we're not proactive enough. And that's sort of the ultimate goal. And I don't want to have a debate here about zero harm, but at the end of the day, safety efforts should be about stopping people getting hurt as best we can. And so what I'm going to sort of talk about now is not a debate about zero harm, but is a debate of, is there ways that we can have a better chance of stopping people being hurt? And that's where I want to extend us now into safety too. So I'm going to follow a similar type of structure for safety 2 in terms of organizational capacities and the practitioner role. Let's go. So organizational capacities. So there's a few different models to use. The normal safety 2 model of Eric Holnagel's, which is monitor, anticipate, respond, and learn, is quite similar. This is more of a resilience engineering model, which looks at anticipation, readiness to respond, synchronization, and proactive learning. They're quite similar models. There's some slight nuance differences, but what we are trying to do when we think about safety 2 and resilience engineering particularly is we're trying to create foresight about future operating conditions and revise our current understanding of what risk looks like within our business. We're trying to maintain deployable reserve resources. You need to have capacity to match demand. Demand and ever increasing demand in our complex systems means that there needs to be deployable reserve resources. This does challenge the ever-present push in our organizations for efficiency. For faster, better, cheaper, and the more that some efficiency pushes that simplify our organizations are definitely making things safer, and some efficiency pushes which take necessary resource and redundant resource out of our organizations can be making us less safe. Synchronization. This is our organizations are ever more complicated. For those who have sort of followed a few of the major accident books, so particularly Professor Andrew Hopkins' books into some of BP's incidents in the last decade or 13 years, you'll see what their organizational structures look like. You won't have to look far within your own organizations to see very fuzzy organization structures, very siloed organizations, very disconnected businesses. And without clear and synchronized information flows across the organization, then things will be missed. Things will fall through the gaps. People won't have the information they need to make good decisions. And so then proactive learning. And we know we need to be constantly searching for these weaknesses in our organization, or these gaps in our organization. There's a good model that Dave Woods developed called the safety energy model. And it's kind of like, where's your organization looking in order to be proactive about safety? And one of the real issues there, which I liked, was if you sit down with your calendar and you just look at your week, how much time do you really have that's just yours free to roam around the organization? I tend to say that people should aim for at least 50%. So 50% of time every single day, every single week in your organization, unallocated, just to respond to what your hunches are on that day, who you think you need to have a conversation with to find something out, what you think you might need to follow up on, what did someone say to you that, just made your ears prick up a little bit, and now you want to actually go into that department and have a bit of a chat to what's going on. It's really hard for organizations to say, yeah, I want my safety people to have 50% of their time free, but I think it's absolutely necessary if we're going to do some of the proactive tasks that I'm just about to talk about. So what are the professional practices? So safety professionals need to essentially focus on everyday work. And we know that we need to think about work as done, but what does that actually mean? What it means is our objective understanding should be work, not safety. So we shouldn't be trying to look at work as it relates back to our safety management system. We should be looking at work for what it is. It's work. And we need to understand it. We need to understand the challenges and the problems that people face. We need to understand, all the tensions and the adaptations that they're making. We need to know where the uncertainty is in our organization. So in the engineering teams, in the procurement teams, in the HR teams, in our operations teams, what are they struggling with? What don't they understand? What rushed conclusions are they running towards? We need to really support local practices and balance job demands of frontline teams. So we actually, in this, we need to know how work is kind of like changing and adapting. And this is probably the hardest bit for safety people, because not all adaptations are safe. Because if you think work as done is always right, then you're going to be let down from a safety point of view. And we know that from like the NASA incidents. We know that from Sydney Decker's writing on drift into failure and things like that. We know that things look normal and feel normal, but are very far from being safe. So the very hard thing for a safety person to do is look at the way work is being done and decide, yeah, that's okay from a safety point of view, or that's not okay. So the safety professional really needs to actually support or undermine what the way that work's actually happening. And that's obviously a really difficult thing to do proactively. We need to generate action to reduce goal conflict. So we know that goal conflict is a major source of risk for safety in organisations. So this is where we need to actually get involved in decisions about production targets and budgets in our organisation. So how many of us can, 3 months into the year, go back to the finance department and say, look, this asset's had a couple of problems. It's already 10% behind budget. I'm worried about them trying to catch up over the next 8 months. Let's reset their budget and set them back to zero and give them a fresh start 3 months into the year. You know, how many people can go back into their organizations and say, this project's running late. I don't want the project to compromise to try to get the job done. How about we re-baseline all of the schedules and re-baseline all of the budgets and give them a fresh start? You know, that may seem like a very silly thing to say and a very impossible thing to say, but actually, if we want to really balance goal conflict in our organization, that's the thing that we have to do. We can't just put our thumb harder on the side of the scale for safety. You can't just say, well, that pressure on that side is what it is, and all we're going to do is put pressure on the other side that balances it out and just send more and more safety messages and more safety activities. All we're creating then is just more tension in the system. And when it snaps and breaks, it's going to break hard. It's either going to break really hard on the safety side, or it's going to break really hard on the operational performance side. Facilitating the free flow of data and information across organizational boundaries. So how many of us make sure that information from the engineering department is flowing accurately through to the procurement department in terms of specification of equipment? How many of us really make sure that information out of our HR system is flowing back into our operations system and things like that? So knowing what these information flows look like within your organization and your role in just getting information to where it needs to be. So getting information that you hear out in the field back into management decision makers in a way that is clear to them what they need to do in terms of the next decisions that they need to make. So this is actually being, informative to the organization. So how are you actually getting yourself informed about what's going on and bringing that back and being informative to people in your business? Generating future operational scenarios. This is probably a real extension of risk management that we need to get good at. There is some models of how to do sort of scenario-based planning in our strategic worlds within our organization. There's also some stuff that we do, some simulations that we do in our project risk management world. But we actually need to develop some tools and techniques for how we generate operational scenarios. So we need to know that if we're 3,000 hours behind in our maintenance of this asset at this point in time, what's that going to mean in 3 months' time? What's that going to mean in 6 months' time? How long until that maintenance backlog is going to cross over into safety critical maintenance, and which safety critical maintenance is likely to go first, and then what systems are likely to be compromised, and how we actually get that 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year projection into our business so that we can course correct. We know that course correction is easier when it's a small sacrifice as opposed to when it's big. It's easier to catch up on 100 hours of maintenance than it is to catch up on 100,000 hours of maintenance. So this is where this is probably one of the most necessary things that we need to tackle to create risk foresight, but it's probably one of our least mature areas in terms of things that we've thought about, specific tools and techniques for how to do it and what scenarios to actually plan around. We should be facilitating the making of sacrifice judgments for safety. So these are some of these trade-offs that I said earlier, but this is helping to actually get decisions made. I'll tell a quick story, which I'll de-identify a little bit, but an asset manager was about to do a really inherently high risk maintenance activity in my last internal role in an organization. And I gave him a call a few days before just to ask him how he was feeling about what was going to happen later in the week in terms of this task. And due to some environmental factors, he said, look, I'm not quite, it's within our safe operating envelope for how we plan to do it, but there's going to be better environmental conditions a couple of days later. And I feel much more comfortable if we put it off by 2 days. That was actually going to cost about $500,000. And this was an asset manager that was 5 or 6 levels down in the organization. He said, look, I don't know how to raise this issue because it's within all of our existing procedures and all of our existing requirements. I'm just going to get told to just get on and do it. So I said, that's okay. I'll get the decision made. And so rather than have him seen to be the one who was being difficult when it comes to safety, I was able to get that decision made on his behalf. But the only reason I was able to do that was because I gave him a phone call 3 or 4 days before the activity happened, and we worked through a bit of a plan over the next couple of days. So that was quite a large sacrifice judgment for safety, but they can be made, and it's much easier to do it 1 day, 1 week before than right when people are in the line of fire. And then facilitating learning from daily organizational life as well as unexpected events. This learn from normal work, learn from surprise. So for those who follow a little bit the Safety 2 literature will know that we need to understand normal work and learn from normal work. There is some interpretations which says we don't need to investigate incidents. That's not true. We need to apply resources to both understanding normal work, successful work, as well as surprises within our organization, which include accidents and incidents. So you'll see that safety is, I don't even know if, safety is once or twice on this slide, but you start to see that the role quickly moves out of its traditional safety box and starts to play around in operations, play around in other functional departments, play around in a whole raft of processes, does less transactional and clear activity and stuff that's a bit more blue sky and ambiguous for the organization. So these things are very hard for organizations to deal with. And this kind of explains probably why we haven't been fast in our ability to transform our role. It's very hard to show the transactional metrics or success of these things because it's very hard to show the things that don't happen. And it's very hard, like I said earlier, to ask an organization to give you 50% of the time just to walk around having coffee with people. But really, we actually need to think hard about, the things that are taking up our days and what we need to do. Because it won't be the safety non-compliance or the person who's missed their safety training course that causes the major accident in your organization. It will be, decisions made around intense goal conflict. It will be information that hasn't flown, not from the safety department, but information that hasn't got from a client to a contractor, an engineer to a purchaser, or a manager to a worker. It'll be those types of things which will be the breakdowns that will cause the major incidents. I kind of don't know if I think we rush to the conclusion that it's our weaknesses in our safety processes that cause our incidents, but I don't know whether that's, I personally don't believe that that's the case. So then let's go into the adaptation of work, and then we can dive into questions. So what happens? So this is just a sort of a mirror slide of the one that I showed earlier, and fluency, like we said, sort of is about work as done. And if the object of understanding and the object of focus for the safety profession is work, so not your safety plans and processes and practices and how well they're doing, it's work and how well is work happening. And if you bias your focus towards work, then it allows you to revise your imagined view of the world. You can still change work. You can still not be happy with what you see in your organization, and you can still work with the people in your organization to adjust it back closer to what you'd planned to do for very good reasons. But you need to be actually dealing with the real-time data that's coming out of your operation. You need to deal with the situation that's right in front of your organization on any given day and revise your model of risk and your model of work. This is the only way that it's going to allow you to keep pace. It's the only way that you can't be a day or a week or a month behind what's happening in your operation, as we sometimes are when we produce a safety report that's 45 days after after the incident actually happened. The only way to keep pace is to be present in the moment or thinking ahead. And what this does is if you focus on work and your organization knows that you're focused on work and you're dealing pragmatically and fairly with what you're learning and understanding about your work, then people will show initiative. People will give you their ideas. They will adapt their work in ways that are consistent with the direction of the organization, and they will support each other. And so this reciprocity, which is that I do what I need and I also know what you need and I help you with what you need. We might think of this if we're familiar with the Bradley curve about an interdependent safety culture or the Hudson model or a generative safety type of culture. This is this extension of my world into others' worlds and support for other people's success. And that will only happen if there's an environment where people are expected to do that, supported to and encouraged to do that. And then people will help each other out in organizations. So this is kind of the where the presentation kind of ends. What I've done is step through the past and quite possibly the present of how we think about safety in organizations, what our role is as safety people to support that, consistent with kind of an overriding purpose, which is to support line managers to implement safety processes to meet safety objectives. And then I've kind of gone, well, that might limit us. It might limit us in where we go in organizations. It'll limit us in what we do. It'll limit us in what we see, and it'll limit us in our ability to intervene. And so then I've kind of stepped into the safety 2 world, which is, I admit, more murky, less well-defined. And it always will be because it's not our current practice in our current world, and tried to step through those organizational capacities, tried to step through what it might mean for practice. On that slide before this one, if you download the paper, there's a bit of a clearer activity set for things that you could almost start putting into your calendar and doing. And then showed, I suppose, if we focus it on this safety one end of the spectrum, what the destructive adaptation cycle of work might look like. And then also on the safety 2 side, that by focusing on work as done, revising our model of risk and keeping pace with our operation, we're more likely to stay on top of issues. We're more likely to get in front of risks within our organisation, understand them better, and have better information to make better decisions. So what I'd like to do now is answer questions. I think we've probably still got 20 minutes or so. I can see that there's already a couple of questions. So let me just start doing that. You can type them in and away we go. Is that, Sarah, you okay with that?
Yep, I'm here. I'm going to be reading them out. So I'll start with the first one here. Joelle asks, have you thought about the role of the safety regulator within a safety 2 context?
I think the regulator needs to be more open to contemporary safety theory. And I know that there's some of the regulators are thinking about this right now, particularly Martin in Safe Work SA, and that really trying to understand, the different ways of thinking about and managing safety. I just think regulators just need to be not pushing too hard for traditional safety practices, not taking the easy road of coming out and saying, oh, where's your procedure? If you don't have a procedure, you're non-compliant. When we speak to safety practitioners, the biggest barrier to people experimenting and expanding their safety approaches is the fear of what might happen if something goes wrong and how the regulator might react. So I know it's hard in their world, but I think regulators need to create a little bit of space and a little bit of open-mindedness on the right things for organisations to continue to improve.
Lee asks, how do you apply safety 2 practices in organisations that have self-insurance or 4801, which is very much based on checklist documentation and established procedures? Does 45001 improve on this?
I think you had a webinar, Sarah, on 45001 recently. Look, it's a challenge. Self-insurance is a challenge. The Office of the Federal Safety Commissioner is traditionally a real challenge for organisations. Look, these models don't tell you just how expansive you need to have this approach within your organisation that I described. You're always going to need to have documentation in your business. You're going to need to have guidelines and plans and risk assessments and those things. I think you can just accept that as a foundation, and I think you can build a lot around and on top of that to achieve almost everything that we've spoken about today. You can recut the way that you do audits and surveillance within your organization to be more learning focused and active. And I think there's some certification companies, Kobe Simmet, for example, in his business, that they'll work with you to achieve certification and manage your business the way that adds value to your business.
Okay, Mark Alston, how do we convince organisations that this model of a safety professional will be more effective than the existing undefined model? A quick look at HSEQ ads shows that organisations are firmly entrenched in a safety one model.
Thanks for the easy question, Mark. That's good. So look, this is hard to change. And the way I've been talking about it for a couple of years is a bit like who's going to break the cycle, the chicken or the egg. What's going to come first? Is the organisation going to change the way that they want the safety professional to perform their role? Or is the safety profession going to change the way it performs and then have the organisation see that? I did, for many of you might know, or those who don't, I worked as a GM of safety at Origin Energy for a while. And some of the work that we did there was in the first Safety Differently movie. And that was all led out of the safety profession. That was just changing the nature of the conversations we were having in the organisation, changing the things that were within our control in terms of what we focused on, and slowly over several years reshaping our organisational approach and our organisational system around safety. And, we did a lot of great things and we didn't get there with everything. So I think the safety profession should take some initiative to evolve the profession the way that we think adds the most value. And when you start doing some of this stuff, you'll actually find that people will notice you being more effective. You'll have better and more open and honest conversations with people. You will be more helpful. You will be taking more of an interest in understanding, the needs of managers, the needs of the frontline workforce. You'll be solving operational problems and challenges. You'll be helping an operations team get something fixed within the engineering department. You'll actually become useful in helping people improve their core work. And once you become useful in helping your organization function more broadly and making people's work better and easier, your organization will see the value in that. I guarantee your organization will see the value in that.
Thank you. Trudy asks, I haven't read Safety 1 or Safety 2, and I'm pleasantly surprised to find I'm already working in the Safety 2 zone. I want to find out more, but I'll just ask, she also amends that my question, should I read both Safety 1 or can I just read Safety 2?
Yeah, so good question. And I just before I sort of got really doubled down in the safety space, I was quite frustrated because I felt that I was working in my role very different to what the organisation was expecting of me and how the profession was working. I was about to step away from the profession about 10 years ago. And then I decided, like I said, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem, and wanted to take a more active role in reshaping it. And many of you will see yourselves in some of these activities. I think there's a few really early books. There's Sidney Dekker wrote The Field Guide to Understanding Human Error, which was pretty good in the mid-90s. But Eric Holnagel's book, Safety 1 and Safety 2, is also a very good basic book that talks about the past and the future. Sidney Dekker just wrote another book called The Foundations of Safety Science, which is meant to be a textbook style of the last 100 years of safety theory and research, and what our theoretical foundations of the safety field, safety discipline is. So there are a few examples. If you want to email me, Trudy, I'll give you a list or send you some articles to have a read of.
Sean asks, has any consideration been given to influencing changes in the INSPO, the Occupational Health and Safety Professional Capability Framework, a global framework for practice to better align with Safety 2?
I don't know from an INSPO point of view. I'm very familiar with the INSPO framework. So I don't think the answer would be yes. I think there was a lot of effort to get that many organisations to agree to the framework, that many organisations and countries to agree to the framework in the first place. And I know that because it was kind of led out of the team at the Safety Institute or in Australia, and Pam Pryor particularly, and others. So I don't think they'll be rushing to amend that in line with contemporary safety thinking and Safety 2, because this is still quite a niche theory when it comes to organisational practice. I know that IOSH just released their new competency framework. It doesn't really go into this space. on a separate side, we're going to do some things into the Australian market that's going to push into this space and provide opportunities for safety professionals who want to develop capability in this area. But it could be a decade before we see any of this reflected in global frameworks.
Neil asks, how do you go about changing executive team understanding who are very focused on outcomes?
That's a very good question. You need to help executives understand the end. So the outcomes aren't going to go away, and the recordable injury rates aren't going to go away. Restructuring the way that you provide them with the information, and restructuring the way that you provide commentary around the outcomes, providing insight and qualitative information, reshaping the conversation to balance between proactive discussion and a reactive review of outcomes. So your executive needs to understand that their role is not just to look in the rearview mirror when it comes to safety. Their role is to look forward. When you drive your car, you glance in your rearview mirror every 5 or 10 seconds, but you focus on the road in front of you, and that's the way that we have to reshape our conversations with the executive. What's happening now in our organisation? What does it mean for tomorrow? What decisions do we need to make? Knowing the answers to why someone rolled their ankle a month ago is not a necessary executive conversation.
John asks, could this philosophy mirror approaches to quality? What do you think?
So absolutely. Some of this stuff is in some of the like Deming's approach to a little bit about Deming's approach to quality, although he still liked to count and categorize things. I think when you mention quality, I've said in a couple of talks that I think safety management is a real risk of going where the quality profession goes if we don't evolve our role to show value. And what I mean by that is, in a past life, I managed quality as part of my safety environment responsibilities. For those who've been in the profession for a while, you'd notice the emphasis on quality in the 90s. There was, companies had quality management manuals and ISO 9000 certifications and global quality frameworks and quality competency frameworks and so on. And then organizations, like particularly the Japanese organizations like Toyota and the European organizations like Volkswagen and others, who are the pinnacles of safety, of quality management, started having these major quality issues. And their organizations kind of realized that their quality department that was sitting in the corner was not really driving quality outcomes in their business. And quality was a part of everyone's day-to-day work. And now we rarely see corporate quality departments. Unless you're in the medical or the pharmaceutical or some of those types of industries where you've got a quality department, and most of those quality departments are just regulatory focused, the profession will disappear. And I think if safety management doesn't evolve, organizations will continue to have accidents. Safety departments will continue to not be able to provide their organizations with responses, and the organizations will look elsewhere to get their needs met.
Daniel asks, how do you get this message across the line with boards and ELT? They have been told for years by other H&S people that safety one is the way forward.
Yeah, there's two things to do here, and frame the first like I frame the start is say, this is not, if you make this an or conversation, which is we have to stop doing everything we're doing and do something completely different, that's too big for an organization to deal with the emotion and the perceived liabilities in this space. So it has to be, you have to start with it being an evolution rather than a revolution, and just naturally extending your processes, backing away your destructive things and adding new things in. I don't know if there's a revolutionary approach to take to this, because everyone in the organization has been told to do safety a certain way for their entire working life. So it has to start with being an evolution. The second thing is to get some legal help. Find some great lawyers. They're all around, Michael Toomer, Paul Catrone, Greg Smith, these guys in Australia who can come into your board with credibility and talk about the need to expand your current approach. To be more focused on risk, to be less focused on bureaucracy, to not be focused on lagging indicators. So that would be my advice. Think of the first steps you can take, and if your board's still being resistant, bring in an OHS lawyer to have a chat to them.
Troy says, does your research have enough data or evidence to support?
I mean, how much is enough is probably a question. In the paper, I heavily reference the research and the literature around the limitations of our traditional approach. But the future approach is somewhat speculative, and I acknowledge that. I absolutely acknowledge that reading the Safety 2 literature and then thinking through the current limitations and current practice and trying to redesign that is new theory. Doing a couple of small experiments to reshape some roles, and we've got some things planned next year with some organisations to try to get some more data around the effectiveness of this. Without going too much into it, it's really hard to know when you say support. We know that injury measures are not good variables, not good dependent variables to use when it comes to safety. So you really got to think about what you're trying to do. All I know is that when I reshape my organisation like this, as I was sort of doing the research and beforehand, is our safety climate scores went up, our incident rates went down, our internal customer satisfaction feedback from clients went up, and our cost went down by 50% in direct safety cost. So if you measure success by climate and incident performance and customer feedback and cost efficiency, then in one experiment or one case study, then the results are good. But not enough research to make generalized claims.
Alistair asks, how would this approach on certification 45001?
Yeah, we talked a bit earlier. You still need to meet what's in your certification requirements, but you can interpret those through a lens of safety too. When you look at your consultation requirements and your risk management requirements and your resourcing requirements, and your surveillance requirements, 45.1 isn't actually that prescriptive in what you have to do. It's fairly principle based at the end of the day, in my interpretation of it anyway. So there's probably more flexibility than we actually give ourselves the opportunity to explore within that framework.
Troy asks, you mentioned that you can use emerging theories of safety to resilience engineering and safety differently to transform the purpose, tasks and activities of safety practitioners to help them create foresight about the changing shape of risk. But human beings are not good at predicting or forecasting what is going to happen in the future. Do you have any experience to share with us?
Yes. Well, I agree with you, Troy. We are terrible at predicting the future. Experts are terrible at predicting the future. I think what the two things that I'd share, I'm just trying to think, that's quite a hard question. So I do have some experience. I was talking to a project manager one time about his project, and he was behind schedule. And I asked him, like, the question is, do you feel any pressure to compromise for safety? And he's like, and I said, so what are the last couple of conversations that you'd had with your boss about this? Oh no, they've all been about the schedule. So do you think he wants you to meet the schedule, even if you have to compromise safety? And I won't go into the whole conversation, but you can see the way that conversation's heading, and it was a disconnect in the organization. And so my foresight would be around what could happen if that disconnect remains within this business. So all I did then was actually create an open dialogue and conversation between the project manager, his manager, and myself to just clarify exactly what the expectations and priorities were on that project for the remainder of that project, and what good looked like for success there, which was no further delays and a safe outcome. And so when I say predicting what might happen in the future, like that story I gave earlier about maintenance, it's very hard to predict with accuracy a long way into the future, but it's actually not that hard to find information about the current functioning and make shorter term and try to actually generate shorter term implications. So that would be my only experience with that. Think short term.
Andrew says he loves your illustration on the slide that you're stuck on. It's such a likeness. And what readings would you recommend for bridging the gap between the language of business and the language we're used to?
Andy, it's late in Canada, mate. Look, yeah, it is a likeness. It's actually a caricature. Okay. Sorry, mate, I ignored your question. Stuck on what reading? What reading would you recommend for bridging the gap between the language of business and the language we're so used to? I don't know. Look at the popular management books. So the stuff that, I don't know, on the bestsellers list, try to think of the books that your CEOs might be reading. Even originally, even reading stuff like Stephen Covey's work or some of that stuff, you'll get the language for how executives and managers talk and try to relate some of the ideas and concepts into more easily digestible language. Safety too is not a language that is normal in an organization, but participative safety or things like, so there's other ways to talk about these ideas that are using language that's more accessible to people.
Okay, John asked, many of these practices and skills require a level of business and life maturity. Have you any thoughts on the tertiary education required to enable these skills in safety practitioners?
I agree with you, John. It's, cliches, there's genuinely a bit of truth in every cliche, and you can't put an old head on young shoulders. And I only know that from my own personal career experience. I think undergraduate tertiary education and straight into a safety role is fine as a career pathway. I hope that people who choose that as a career pathway have good mentors and good support in the first 10 years of their career, whether that's within safety or within their organisation. I think that degree programs can do much better. I just made a suggestion that I think safety degrees should include a field work component and not an internship as a safety person, but you have to take a semester out and go and work on the front line. So go and be a cleaner in a hospital, go and be a truck driver, go and be a traffic manager on a construction site or something, and look back at safety from the perspective of the people that you're trying to help and understand work as done and real work. And I think, to be really innovative, we'd be doing things like that, subjects in our undergraduate degrees where people go off and be a scaffolder for 6 months. I think they'd learn more about safety in that 6 months and they get more out of the rest of their degree program than what they're currently getting.
Rick has a similar question. How do we equip our safety professionals and other stakeholders with technical and behavioural competencies, tertiary, vocational and experiential, aligned to the Safety 2 approach?
Yeah. G'day, Rick. How are you going? So workplace-based development and action learning are really kind of the only approaches I think that work here. So giving people frameworks and activities which lets them kind of develop the skills, giving them space and the opportunity to develop those skills within their work setting, and then creating reflection and feedback or deliberate reflective practice and feedback mechanisms to continue to develop it. So I don't know if tertiary or vocational training is going to give people the non-technical and the interpersonal skills they need to be able to navigate these tasks within organisations.
Paul says, I feel taking the word safety out and directing the conversations at business improvement or work practice improvement is most effective in my experience. I also still believe critical control checks are important to support our operational leaders and protect the organisation from serious events. Do you agree with the coaching drive in industry now and safety professionals being made more subsidiary? It seems like we get called up when it's bad and dismissed when it's good.
Yeah, I don't know about that drive within industry around coaching, but I think if it's kind of like leaders as coaches, so we're seeing it in the utility sector on the east coast of Australia and things like that, which is developing our frontline supervisors into being coaches and trying to maximise their ability to get the most out of their work teams, and then sort of sidelining the safety profession within that. Maybe that's happening. I think there's definite utility in critical controls critical controls for risk. Although I have seen in parts of the mining sector and others where that gets turned into a tick and flick compliance activity and has kind of missed its intent and purpose. So I think that hey, look, if supervisors develop coaching skills, that's not a replacement for the safety profession. It just means that safety profession can move into much broader tasks that I've described today and provide more support into that line manager. So we just need to evolve and adapt our role in a positive way as organisations and industry trends kind of evolve and adapt. It's probably not a very good answer, but that's what I'd say to
that. Dave, we've hit an hour. Do you think some of these questions, do you want to keep going or do you want to answer some of these questions in maybe a summary type form?
I'm happy to answer them. I'm happy to answer them because it's going to be easier to talk briefly to them than to type about them. And
right.
We'll just whip through as quickly as we can, maybe. And if people want more or longer answers, then they can email me and and I'll give them longer answers.
Yeah, very happy to do that. So Andy says, no, have we done that one? Andy's, have we?
No.
No, okay. And he says, understand and absolutely agree with the need to work across the business. If we stick with tasks with safety in the title, then our experience is limited to that and our solutions are limited by our experience. Senior corporate HSE people to get exposure to how other departments work. So how do we change the development path of HSE to get the right experience, to be able to work with other departments?
So that's really hard to do. I don't know whether businesses see safety people or HSE people having the skills to work in other departments. People are fine to put a HR person into a safety role, but not necessarily to put a safety person into a HR role. Definitely, I tried a lot for a long time in my career to get an asset management or a project management role, but never was seen by the organisation to have the skills to do that. So I actually don't know if we can get our organisations there. I think we need to figure out how to develop safety people to have the skills and exposures to the departments within their own roles in some way, because maybe there's an evolution of the role in 10 years where the role is seen as a really credible business leader type of role, but I don't see too many safety EGMs of safety becoming the next CEOs of their business.
Paul asks, how might organisational structures assist or restrain a move to working in a Safety 2 framework? For example, where safety works within HR or operational departments, does it favour a Safety 1 approach and limit exposure to other work groups?
Yeah, look, so a couple of things here. I think it definitely, Safety 2 approaches are helped if you've got at least a team of safety people. If you're one or two people and you're reporting to an asset or a project that are there to deliver day-to-day work and need to meet compliance requirements, then your ability to kind of independently reshape your role is limited. So therefore, a more centralized safety department, or at least a big enough safety teams within different parts of the business, allows you to collectively reshape your purpose and intent and provide some social support for that. So definitely teams, safety teams help. I think it's made harder if you're in HR. HR don't have a bias towards work, operational work. That's going to be, I hope that's not too offensive to HR people, but safety departments, and particularly working in Safety 2, have to, like I said, bias towards what's happening in the operation. And so it's probably going to be helped. A Safety 2 approach is probably going to be helped if the safety department is more aligned to an operational department, who are going to see the broader benefits from the safety team being involved in broader operational improvement than in another functional department where the safety department's seen as needing to just deliver on what's in their box.
Philip asks, how does Safety 2 practice help organisational leaders with their due diligence duties?
Hi, Phil. How are you going? Look, I think it helps a lot. Michael Toomer has come out a lot on record and said it helps a lot that due diligence is not discharged or demonstrated by many of our traditional safety practices. So there's this, yeah. So I think it absolutely helps. It's complementary to the due diligence tests. But I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to go too far. Only to say that from the lawyers that I've spoken to, expanding our current approach to safety more towards Safety 2, more participative safety management, more grounded in the reality of work, more forward-looking and proactive, more broader conversations about risk, definitely provides a stronger due diligence demonstration.
James says, do you think organisations that employ a safety management system could adopt the Safety 2 concept easier?
I don't know. I think there'll be other factors within your organisation around leadership and culture and social norms and other things which are going to determine whether Safety 2 is easier or harder in your business than whether you've got a safety management system or not. I do think that, so I don't know. I don't think it's easier or harder. There's ways that it'll be easier because you can just redesign that safety management system. And if people are used to taking guidance from a central kind of system, then you'll be able to guide them towards Safety 2 from a central safety system. If people aren't, then, you've got a blank page where you can start to, not build a system, but build participative practices and other sorts of things in place. So, yeah.
Okay, our Madden asks for organisations that have rigid safety formats, that is maritime with ISM, International Safety Management Code. How can we start introducing safety to concepts?
So look, so I'm familiar with the ISM code and maritime. There's quite a lot of work happening out of in Scandinavia. A lot of research in safety too in the maritime industry that's happening in particularly out of Scandinavia, like Christine Storkinson and others. And there's also quite a lot happening globally around things like bridge resource management, which takes sort of crew resource management out of aviation and applies it to the bridge on vessels and so on. You know, I think it is harder because it's a very traditional industry, and it's been doing things a certain way for a very long time. And the SMS is if it's not in the SMS, it kind of doesn't happen. And everything to do with safety needs to be within the SMS. So I think it'll be a little bit slower, but I do think you can start to evolve your SMS to be more aligned with safety too.
Joe asks, how do you oversee safety too with contractors in the forest industry? We contract contractors so there can be a 1/2 degree of separation.
Yeah, contractors is even probably harder for organisations to go than with their own people. I think a number of construction companies that have tried to go down the path of safety too, or are going down the path of safety too, can make steps with their own people faster for some reason than with their contractors. Maybe there's more trust or just some other bias that makes that easier. And the contracting relationship just still seems quite hard to do this. I think I always advise, partnerships and collaborative models, collaborative contracting relationships are always better. I'm not a huge believer in competitive tender processes, particularly when it comes to safety. You get no intelligence out of a competitive tender process about safety, and you generally get no intelligence, as far as I'm concerned, about the capacity to perform work safely out of your pre-qualification processes either. That might be a bit antagonistic, but that's my belief anyway. I just think that what you need to do is get to know your contractors, establish long-term relationships with them that are open and trusting, and make sure that they're mutually successful. So it's in your interest to make sure your contractors are successful, and therefore it'll be in their interest to make sure that you're successful in the long term.
Jovan, safety too focuses on normal performance of the work. 2 questions. To improve normal performance, should we be focusing on improving system performance first? And how do we measure safety too?
Yeah, good question. So we should be. So what I was going to say is we should be looking at normal work to understand our system more broadly. So if we think at that normal work, the way that work happens and the outcomes of work are an emergent property of the functioning of our system, then it means that there's upstream factors which are shaping work to be the way that it is. So you don't just want to take the safety one approach and try to adjust work because you're sort of dealing with a symptom. So the way that work's being performed is the symptom of your organizational functioning. So what you have to do is gather intelligence out of the way that work's being performed, interpret that, and understand kind of the more systemic drivers of why work is being performed in that way. Cultural, leadership, system, whatever that might be. So definitely you should look at the work, but you should always try to improve the way that the overall system is functioning. In terms of measuring safety too, I'll probably take that on notice. There's no easy way to quantitatively measure some of the things that we're talking about in safety too, because there's not a lot of activity that's transactional in nature. You can count things, how many learning teams have we run, but that really doesn't help anything like that. I think there are some measures that we use, like locus of control, which is a psychological metric to try to understand how much ownership and control people feel they have over safety and their work, and that would promote autonomy and initiative and decision making and so on. So there is some psychological measures which may have some utility in this space, and I think we actually need to rethink about what our climate measures look like and align them with safety too. And if people feel like they can talk openly about safety, if people feel like they can get access to the resources they need, these types of questions and the right answers to those is probably the most effective way to measure safety too. So I think, to make a long answer short, if you wanted to take something existing and say, how well is my safety too doing, maybe just pick a few good questions out of a climate survey, and that might be the easiest way to start.
Mark Alston asks, is one of the challenges in convincing organisations of the worth of Safety 2 and the new role that we haven't come up with new metrics that give comfort for leaders to make the change?
Yeah, exactly right. And that's just the conversation that we just had then. And I know some organisations have started to reshape their reporting dashboards and that to try to actually provide more sort of information out of their sort of Safety 2 practices within their organisation. And yeah, so that we need to be able to provide management information in a format that makes management feel like their organisation is under control.
Okay, I think Brett's asking similar. You mentioned reading the climate in a previous answer. What indicators are you measuring to gauge the climate?
Oh, look, I think there's a lot of different climate metrics and indicators. There's even questions that you'll have in your employee engagement surveys, which hint at not even the safety questions, in your broader employee engagement questions, things like, I have the necessary resources I need to do my job. I get, management communicate openly with me about what's happening. I get feedback. I get my decision. My inputs are valued within the organisation. So these very general employee engagement questions are very useful when it comes to people's experience of the organisation and daily organisational life and how work is being shaped. So probably so I think maybe not even a specific safety climate instrument, because if you ask people, is safety a priority for us? Everyone's going to say yes. If you start asking people, do you have the resources you need to do your work when you need it? People might say no. So I think you need to stop asking safety questions to get underneath, what people think about work.
Okay, Maretta asks, what are the mix of who is tuning into this webinar, what industries and what roles? I think I could suggest that if you could write that in the chat column, because we didn't ask that question on the form, but if you are interested, just put down your role and your industry in the chat and then people can see. Troy asks, Eric said, how to do Safety 2 isn't an enigma. You shouldn't do Safety 2. You should do what you do, but also try to think about it in a wider context. What do you think?
Yeah, look, Eric is, he used Safety 2. He coined the term Safety 2 and tried to use it to distinguish between traditional safety, which he labelled as Safety 1. And that's created this sort of binary black and white between the two. But he does go to quite a lot of lengths to say that, his ideas are an expansion of what we've done traditionally. So yeah, his view is like, you should look at incidents. But if you're looking at incidents which happen, 1 in 10,000 times when you do a task, why wouldn't you be interested in the other 9,999 times it gets done without the incident? So in that case, in that way, what he's trying to do is just talk about, what's the broader context for safety? What's the broader context for work? Stepping back and looking at and taking a bigger picture. So if that's kind of what you mean, I agree with that. And that's why I try to not set up arguments with people about Safety 1, Safety 2, but try to help people see how Safety 2 is an extension of what they're currently doing or what they might want to do.
Okay. We've actually got to the end of those questions. Thank you, Dave. Have you got anything else to say?
Oh, look, I'd just say for those, it's a little bit of a shameless plug, but we are hosting, off that last question, we are hosting Eric Holnagel in Brisbane next year on the 24th for a Safety 2 tutorial, and then the 25th and the 26th of February for a Safety 2 in Practice workshop, where we'll have industry presenting the things that they're doing and Eric talking about what he's doing around the world with organisations in the Safety 2 space. So if you want to, and we're hosting that at ForgeWorks in Brisbane. So if you want to come along and maybe ask more questions or at least get a chance to test your ideas directly with Eric himself, you can sort of register for that. It shouldn't be too hard for you to find that. And if you need to give me an email, send me an email.
Okay. There's quite a few people offering their names and industries in the chat panel, and I'll try and include that in the email if I can as well somehow. a big thank you for Dave for coming along today and sharing his expertise. It's really appreciated, and I know the audience has appreciated this very much. So as I said, emails will come later with videos and links and podcasts, and I hope everyone has a great Christmas too. Would that be all from you, Dave?
Yep, that's all. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Bye.
myosh is a cloud-based workplace health and safety platform that works with you and your team to improve workplace health, safety, and quality. Over 50 configurable models integrate to collect HSEQ data. Modules are used to manage hazards, investigate incidents, manage risk, conduct audits, and much more. Our mobile app is used for fast data capture in the field, online or offline. Features include QR code scanning, digital signatures, geolocations and geofencing, PDF export, and much more. You can configure mobile forms, visibility, and functionality in your administration panel. The myosh dashboard provides powerful organizational insight by transforming your HSEQ data into intelligent visual charts, maps, and tables. Up-to-date data is derived from modules and displayed in an interactive visual format, configured specifically for you and your team. myosh is built on the Viking Pass, a super configurable platform with powerful capabilities. Teams can quickly and easily configure the platform to their own very unique end-to-end process requirements. We encourage you to treat your software technology like a team member. The myosh Academy is designed to empower your team with the skills to ensure they use their software tools productively. Everyone learns differently, so the Academy holds a variety of resources including videos, guided learning, and verified online learning courses for each myosh module. Your investment in myosh helps you and your team manage risk, compliance, and improve workplace health and safety. Today, successful organizations view safety as an asset and health and safety spending as an investment. This is because a safe workplace adds measurable business value and can drive tangible improvements in performance, profit, and culture. Ask our team for an online demonstration today.